Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English.
So hi, and welcome back to episode 214 of the English with Kirsty podcast. I have another guest and I'm going to ask her to introduce herself so that I don't mispronounce your name. Hi, welcome to the podcast. And
Hi, Kirsty.
Can you tell us something about, firstly, your name and something about yourself and what you do?
Hi, Kirsty. My name is Nadezhda. I am a cross-cultural consultant, trainer, and speaker. I work in intercultural environments and I help my clients to understand each other better when we work across cultures.
And what kind of clients do you work with? What kind of, who are your courses and trainings aimed at?
I usually work with companies that employ people who come from different cultures and different countries. So there could be companies based in a particular country but employing a multicultural workforce. Or there could be companies working with other companies across the globe. And in this case, intercultural communication also happens.
Okay, and I also know that you speak a number of languages. 4, is it?
Yeah, that's correct. I am originally from Russia, so I speak Russian as my mother tongue. I also speak French because I lived in France for a certain amount of time, 9 years to be more precise. So I'm quite a French speaker. I also speak English, of course, and Italian, so 4 languages overall.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm finding it interesting to speak to my multilingual guests. Are they all languages that you started learning at school or when you were studying, or are any of them languages that came later in life?
So I started with English. Usually we start learning English quite early on in Russia. So I would say already when I was 7 years old or maybe 8, we had some English classes at school. So English is the the most long, far away kind of language that I speak in my life. Then when I was at the university, I started learning French on top of that. And then when I came to France, I obviously improved my French. And Italian came later on during my professional career.
And I guess maybe French helped a bit with Italian if you already speak or not.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. French actually helped me quite a lot because I remember when I started learning Italian, it sounded very familiar, but at the same time, it was a bit different. Because they're both Latin languages, so they have many, many things in common. First of all, grammar is quite similar. Secondly, pronunciation. So some things can be kind of guessed when you learn the Italian language, but not all of them. So sometimes I had challenges as well. I had to, I have to find out that, not everything is perfectly translatable, and I have to learn the language on its own. But it did help me. I think in 3 or 4 months, I was already understanding quite a lot. And in 6 months, I was already speaking the language. So it was pretty quick.
This is good. And I think it does help. This is my experience with, because I started learning Romanian during the lockdown. And then now I've started Portuguese. So it's like, sometimes I understand more, but that doesn't help me with speaking because I still have to learn to speak and learn vocabulary. But in terms of the way in which sentences are put together or the ideas behind the grammar, that already makes some sense because of the Romanian knowledge. And sometimes if I see something written down, I can guess because I know how it will be in Romanian, and I can have a relatively informed guess about what the sentence means. But then at the same time, you still have to develop the other skills such as speaking and vocabulary and all those things. But I think it can definitely help if you choose a language that is related to one of the ones that you already speak.
Exactly. And I also feel like every time you learn a new language, it kind of adds up to a system that you already have in your head, a sort of a construction of languages and all the different knowledge that you have. And this is why it becomes easier in a way Well, of course, I'm also speaking from the perspective of European languages. I haven't learned any other languages, and I can imagine if one day I wanted to learn Chinese, probably it wouldn't be the same experience. But I still think that this knowledge of languages can help us learn other languages better, even if they don't come from the same language groups and they're not exactly the same. Yeah.
I think it helps you to know yourself as well, because, you know, the school, you have to do what you're told to do. You don't have much autonomy there. But when you're an adult, I have learned which techniques work for me, what I like to do, what brings me the best results. And I think that helps when you can choose to do more of those things with the new language. But also sometimes the same problems crop up for me, and I thought that would get easier. It hasn't actually, but my reluctance to speak until I have something that I think is worth listening to say, that hasn't improved. And I thought maybe with Romanian, because it's a more recent experience, that it would be easier the next time, and it isn't. But maybe that's just something related to my personality, that I don't have much patience with myself at the beginning, and then I relax a bit more when I've learned more. But I think, yeah, if you know yourself, then you can find ways to make the language learning process more efficient or more enjoyable, because really it has to be both. If you're just efficient and you're not having fun, it's kind of depressing. But if you're just having fun and you're not learning very much, that's also not very it depends why you want to learn, but it's arguably not the best use of your time.
I can completely relate to that, and I can also say from my experience, I've learned to understand what was the right moment to switch to the new language and to kind of start using this new language when talking with others. For example, with my partner, who is Italian, we started, when we met each other, we started speaking in English. And then at some point I wanted to switch to Italian, but I felt some kind of reluctance to switch to Italian, because obviously I was better in English and I could express everything in English, and in Italian I felt like a little baby, with little knowledge and with little capacity, although I had many things to say and it was difficult. However, it is important to make this change, and it is important to kind of push yourself to speak the language. Otherwise you would always remain in your comfort zone and you would never actually speak it. So it's important.
Yeah, and I think once you can think in the other language as well, it makes a big difference. Because some of my reluctance to speak is just because I haven't got anything to say. Like half a sentence is not a sentence, it's half a sentence, and I don't want to fill in with English. So, but as soon as I started thinking in Romanian and not translating the words, or as soon as the words started coming into my mind in the right language, then it was easier. Then I could do it. I let myself do it, because okay, I can do this. I can make the whole sentence, and even if it's a simpler version of what I would have said in one of my other languages, it's still a sentence that will convey my meaning.
Sure.
But I mean, I guess the people that you're working with, they're not necessarily working in multilingual environments. They have one language for communication, which everybody is using, certainly in some of the meetings. So what's the biggest challenge that companies or individuals in this situation are facing? What's one of the bigger challenges that you help them to resolve when you provide your training?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is the challenge of communication, because even if we speak the same language, we sometimes can face this challenge, let alone when we speak multiple languages and we're sometimes lost in translation, and there are many other cultural elements that come into the game. For example, we usually speak in the training about the fact that there are different communication styles across cultures. We have some cultures that use explicit communication style, and some other cultures that use implicit communication style. And the difference is that in explicit cultures, we usually mean what we say. So the words would be precisely the meaning of our thoughts, of our intent, etc. So they really communicate and convey the exact meaning. On the other hand, in implicit cultures, we have a different capacity of explaining and expressing ourselves, because we use the words, but sometimes we need to understand the context more to actually understand what the messages are. So the words are not necessarily expressing the exact meaning of what we're trying to say. Do you understand what I mean by
yeah, it's a big problem in the UK sometimes with people here not saying what they mean and other people being very confused.
100%. So this is, for example, one of the challenges that many people face in the work environment. And this is one of the challenges that I try to explain, and I give examples, and we try to do some exercises to understand what are the communication preferences, what are these styles that people are using, and how these styles can influence communication in the workplace. Because of course, if we do not understand each other right from the start, it is difficult to then achieve some results or to go along projects, etc. So
yeah, especially if you keep working with that person, it's not like you go to a cafe and order some food and never see that person again. If it's somebody who's a colleague or a partner, a collaborator, you have to see them. And if you've already made this decision in your mind, like this person is impolite, or this person doesn't communicate well, or it's probably something between both of you that you could both improve, but it's everything else builds on that impression that you have of the personal idea you have about them. And if you don't redress those problems, it can grow into a much bigger problem as you continue to work together.
100%. And I also would like to highlight that these perceptions of politeness, they also differ across cultures, because in some cultures, for example, we use many polite words like please and thank you and could you and would you, etc. We use certain formulas. We formulate our phrases in a certain way in order for them to be polite. But in other languages, it is not the case. In other languages, for example, you just need to say one word, or you don't have to invert the verb with the etc. So there are different formulas that are used to express politeness, and sometimes if we are not conscious of this, someone else's communication can be perceived as impolite, and as a result, our relationship with this person can go wrong, because we might just think that this person is rude, where it's not the case. It's just a different cultural background and a different linguistic background.
Or even the other way around. Like, I think it's polite when people don't waste my time by saying everything's fine when it isn't, because I would rather get to the, like if there's a problem, I'd rather sort it out and be done with it. But there are other styles whereby people think, I don't want to be offensive, I don't want to say, and then everything's fine when everything isn't fine. And that could be a direct clash of ways to approach the situation, whereas both people are trying to do their best, but at the same time it can lead to a miscommunication or failure to communicate, because it isn't always just when we don't communicate well. Failing to communicate with the other person is also linked to communication. It's just that you didn't do it, or you avoided it.
100%. And this is also one of the items that we usually explore, the disagreement styles. Because in some cultures we agree in quite an open way. We disagree in quite an open way. For example, if things are not going well, or if something is not right, we're just saying these things. We say, it is not right, I disagree, I do not want to do this, this is not correct, etc. So we express ourselves quite openly in these cultures. But it is not the case for every single culture. In some cultures, we care about the relationship with the other person so much, and we don't want to disrupt harmony in this relationship. And so this is why we might agree on a surface, but in reality, we disagree, and the other person needs to interpret this disagreement, needs to understand what were the elements that were communicated that actually communicated disagreement. So it could be a silence, it could be something in the body language, it could be something in the way the phrases are formulated in a sort of a communication pattern of the person. So it is not easy, especially if we come from the cultures of direct disagreement, and sometimes it can feel frustrating indeed, but it is important to learn these different styles, because it is usually quite difficult to change them. We are used to these styles and we continue using them throughout our lives. So we just have to know about them and try to adapt and try to find some middle ground solutions.
Yeah, especially when we're with people that don't behave in the same way as we do. And I think that's another reason why it's important, if you are interested in learning other languages, that should be something that you do with other people, with speakers of those languages, because you may not get this information from books. So it's not just an intellectual exercise. If you don't communicate, if you don't also learn about the culture of the places where that language is spoken, and with some language that can be multiple cultures that use the same language but possibly use it in different ways, if you don't do that, then you will limit your ability to use that language well in situations with other people, because you don't have the background knowledge about the culture. You only have the linguistic knowledge.
I completely agree. I think language learning and culture learning, they go hand in hand. And it is important to go deep down in your language learning and deep down in your cultural learning, in order to understand both the language and the culture. Because sometimes, for example, if we're talking about certain expressions, we can't understand these expressions if we don't know why and how they were created, in which circumstances people used to use them, etc. So, or some behaviors. We can observe behaviors that are not, we are not used to, that seem weird or strange or unusual, and we can judge them. On the other hand, if we learn about the culture through the language, we can also understand these behaviors better, and we can therefore adapt better and accept the other culture better.
Did you have any personal experience of that? So I know you've lived in a number of different places, like when you went to France or when you came to the UK. Were there any things that you found strange at the beginning that you had to become accustomed to, either with language or with the way people interacted?
100%. Everything was strange. So first of all, when I came to France, I remember one of the things that really shocked me was the fact that everybody was saying hi to me, like literally on a bus. The driver would say, "Good morning," or somebody in a shop. And this is because in Russia, we have a different relationship with strangers, shall we say. So we keep a bigger distance with people that we do not know. So we do not necessarily say hi to somebody that we do not know. Whereas in France, it is a matter of politeness just to say hi or to say, "How are you?" But when people are asking, "How are you?" for example, in France, they're not necessarily expecting you to tell stories about your life or to tell everything, everything about your problems or your issues or your anything. They're just saying, "Hi, how are you?" It's just a politeness phrase. And I remember that I was really offended that, when I started telling the stories and telling people how I felt, they wouldn't listen. They would just go away.
They were done with that exchange.
Yeah. Why did they ask if they didn't want to listen? This was my frustration. But with the time, of course, I learned to communicate in this way as well, and I understood that there were different levels of communication. So this "Hi, how are you?" phrase was just a beginning, just a quick exchange to kind of break the ice, and that's it. But if people wanted to go on a more personal level, they would ask more personal and other questions, and if also the situation allowed for these questions. So this is one of the examples.
And is that regional? Because my family lived in a village for some time when I was a child, and there you would say hi to random people on the street. But when I moved to London, less so. Occasionally I got into conversations with random people on the tube, but there are so many people, you can't say hi to everyone, or you'd be doing that all day. So do you find there's a regional difference, or is that generally everywhere in France it's like that?
I would say it depends on how many people live in a certain area. So for example, if we're talking about capitals, I lived in a number of capitals, and I would definitely say that in capitals people are less inclined to have conversations with people they do not know, because they are stressed, they're in a rush, they're running, they're doing something else, so they're not predisposed for these conversations. On the other hand, in smaller places, people tend to show more interest to others, and allow more time for a conversation, for an exchange, for a coffee, for whatever. I feel like communication has a different meaning in smaller places.
Maybe we could bring in Italy as well, because I know you have experience with Italian, in the Italian culture. What differences have you noticed in terms of the way that people relate to one another? If you make that comparison as well, so with UK, with France, with Russia, and then with Italy, did anything surprise you there, or did you have to learn to do anything differently?
Sure. I'm always learning in all the cultures. Yeah, so one of the things that surprised me quite a lot, that in Italy people asked more personal questions, and sometimes it felt just so unusual. I just didn't know how to react. You know, people would ask, "Oh, where are you, and what do you do, and what's your job?" And you know, many different questions, and they would be not friends or friend of a friend, at least somebody who is kind of related to you, but they would be just random people that you met, I don't know, in a bar or something. So this perception of distance, once again, perceptions of intimacy, even in a certain way, of subjects that can be considered as personal or not so personal. I felt that there was a difference with respect to my culture and also other cultures that I lived in. So this would be one example, I would say.
That's interesting, because I've noticed something similar with my Romanian friends and contacts and people that I've come across. I quite like it. At first it does feel a bit different, because we don't do that in the UK. But the other part to that was that there were also, so I found that I did have more personal questions. That sometimes that surprised me, but at the same time, the people asking those questions were also very open and willing to share about themselves. So it wasn't just, let's find out about Kirsty. It was also, yeah, let's get to know each other better, and I'm willing to tell you about my situation. And so it wasn't one-sided, because I think if it had been, that would have been more uncomfortable. But I thought, okay, I know more about this person whom I've just met after 30 minutes than I do about some people that I've spent the whole evening with in the UK, and I still don't really know much about them. So I think if you're open to that, it can be really good, because you can develop friendships or closer relationships faster. But at the same time, if you come from a culture where that's not normal, it can be a surprise.
Yeah, definitely. It could be a surprise. But I agree with you. It is a very valuable skill to be able to adapt and to accept this difference. Because, for example, if we talk about Italy, this moment of exchange, this moment of getting to know each other better and understanding personal background of the person better can also help you not only with the friendship that eventually can happen, but also with business relationships, because Italy is a country where everything goes through personal contacts. Everything is done through personal relationships. You know, if you need to, I don't know, even fix something in your house, you don't call a company that fixes things in your house. You call somebody who you know who can fix something in your house. Or if you don't know this person, you call somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, etc. So it is a really different way of doing things, going through personal contacts, going through contacts of the contacts, because this recommendations, this relying on somebody is really developed in this country. And for example, if you do not know about this, you can miss some business opportunities, or you can do business with people that are not reliable because nobody recommended them, etc. So it is an important thing to develop even in a business environment, I would say.
And you need to invest or set aside time for doing that, for building those relationships. You can't just expect, if nobody knows who you are, for example, it's better to begin building your network so that people know something about you, so that if they have worked with you and are willing to recommend you, they can do that. But if nobody knows who you are, it's going to be harder than in a country where people just go online and look for somebody with good reviews, or don't have that same network in place.
100%. You need to invest time, you need to invest energy in building relationships, and you do this via work that you do, of course, with these people, but you can also do this via informal moments. For example, you can have a coffee, you can have an aperitivo, which is, well, we all know what Italian aperitivo is, kind of a pre-meal communication moment. You can do this via having meals with people, via going out, because all these moments of social connection, of social interaction, they help building relationships, and they help eventually then building also business relationship if we need to.
Yeah, I think that's that brings me on to another question about business relationships, whether that's in a formal meeting or whether that's going for dinner or for a coffee. Maybe one-to-one is easier, but if you have more people involved, and a language has been chosen, such as English, for example, as the business language, and you have a mixture of people, some of whom it's their first language, and other people are operating in a second, third, or however many language English is for them. How do you make sure that everybody is empowered in that situation? Because there is a slight imbalance in that some people don't have to think as much about how they express themselves, and some people maybe don't think about it either because they've been using English for a long time. But I work with clients who find some of the social situations more difficult, for example, and end up not saying very much, even though they are quite talkative or quite extrovert normally, but when it comes to using another language, they aren't. So how do we make sure that everybody is empowered and that meetings or social gatherings aren't monopolized by those who feel more confident about speaking?
Yeah, that is a great question. I can definitely relate to it myself because I speak 4 languages, but in every one of these languages, I feel differently. And when speaking some languages, I can occupy quite a lot of space and I can be in the center of attention, in the center of a conversation. In some other languages, less so. And sometimes it feels frustrating because, well, you kind of want to participate, but you can't because you don't allow yourself because you think that people would judge you and whatsoever. Whereas they actually wouldn't because you speak their language, so it is easy for them. In business meetings, it's not easy. I would say it is important for the native speakers to understand this difficulty. Well, it is easier, of course, if we speak other languages or if we lived in other countries or if we even went to different countries for holidays and whatever. If we were in this situation ourselves, if we experienced the difficulty of not speaking our language, then we can relate better to other people's difficulties, and we can be more tolerant, more patient, more inclusive, etc. So I think it's important for those who speak their first language to always remember about the fact that some other people are speaking a different language. So maybe they can slow down. Maybe they can use less idiomatic expressions. Maybe allow more space for other people to talk or ask more questions instead of putting themselves forward. So I think there are these little techniques and steps that can be helpful in a business environment and then can allow other people to feel more comfortable, feel more confident, and express themselves better.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I was when you were speaking, I remember the first time somebody asked me what I did in German. It was before I was teaching, because that would have been easy. I could say I'm a teacher, and the role that I had at that time was more complicated to explain because it didn't fit into any of the normal boxes that we have. And I just sat there thinking, oh, why did you ask me that? I put something together, but I would never have had that problem in English. And if you haven't had those experiences, and moving on from that, I think sometimes people just need a bit of space, because I think there's a tendency, particularly for those who don't speak other language, to think, okay, the person didn't answer immediately, they didn't understand the question. But it could also be that they just need a bit of time to formulate the answer. And if you ask the same question in 3 other ways or repeat it, or that's taking their attention away from the answer that's being put together. I've had that. I understood everything. I just needed, because passive understanding listening, reading is easier than active language creation where you're speaking your own response. And sometimes that takes a bit longer. So as well, to not just assume that people haven't understood if they take a couple of seconds before responding to you.
Exactly. And I also think it is, well, we know about this, those who speak multiple languages. It is important to remember that speaking a foreign language is always a stress. It's always a source of stress for us, because we're putting ourselves in an uncomfortable situation. We have to think twice, formulate, translate, listen. There are multiple processes going on. So it's a huge task. And if on top of that we have other stresses, for example, we didn't sleep well, or we're hungry, or we are overheated, or whatever, it adds on stressful situations, and it becomes even more challenging in a work environment. So definitely patience from other participants of the conversation, and more space is always welcome.
And also people are individuals, so they deal with stress in different ways. Like I go very quiet and withdrawn. That's not always a good sign when I do that. But sometimes it means just like, this is a bit overwhelming, or I'm annoyed with myself that I didn't contribute more earlier and now I'm not sure how to come back in. But some people talk too much when they're stressed, or there are lots of different ways in which you can relate to a feeling of stress, and it's not always obvious what's happening with somebody. So if somebody has gone really quiet, it doesn't mean that they're not interested or they're disengaged. It could be something related to the language. Maybe they are bored, they just don't want. But people deal with this stress in different ways. So unless you really know that person, you might not be able to see or understand what's going on with them.
That is true.
So that's a lot to think about. If people want to find out more about what you're doing or to connect with you, what's the best place to do that?
Well, I think the best place would be LinkedIn. This is a platform that I use most of all to communicate about different things, about cultures, about languages, about communicating internationally and interculturally. And so feel free to connect with me, feel free to reach out to find out more and to ask any questions you might have.
Okay, so I'll add the links, your LinkedIn profile link to the show notes page, which will be at englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/214. And thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. It's been really interesting talking with you. And yeah, thank you. And
thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.